Okay, that is 5 minutes past the hour, so let's get started. So today is day 3 of our intermediate research software development course. And if I skip through the slides, I can give people a summary of what we're going to be looking at today. So today, we'll be looking at the code that we write itself, and we'll be discussing several ways in which we can think about the structure of the code. So these are called programming paradigms. We'll talk about what is a paradigm and why they exist. And we'll cover 2 of the very common ones that you may have heard of, which are object-oriented programming and functional programming. So these 2 are slightly different ways of reasoning about the components of our software and what it is that our software actually represents. After that, we'll then be looking at some more general ideas around the design and the architecture of software. So this is where we'll be following on from our introduction to MVC, Model View Controller. We'll be thinking about design constraints. So what aspects of the environment in which the software runs and who is using the software, what does that do to our decision-making process when we're coming up with the design of the software? We'll look at another type of architecture, which is called a layered architecture, where, as you might expect, we split the software into layers, each of which handles a different responsibility. And this is quite strongly related to MVC. So we'll continue on for our MVC model there and extend it a little bit. And one of the really important ideas we'll get to towards the end is an idea of design by contract, which is sort of like the test-driven development approach of the design of a software component, where we are promising a particular interface. We're making a contract that we will provide a particular interface, and then we're writing the code such that we create something that fulfills that contract. So it's a very, very important concept in software design architecture. The point of today that we've got along the bottom here is really that putting some time up front into thinking about the design, the architecture, the structure of your software is going to save you a lot of time further down the line. It is possible to overdo design. You can spend too long doing it, and maybe we don't need to be super formal with this like you might do in industry. But generally, people under design their software, we find in academia and in research projects. So adding a bit more time up front to think about that will save us a lot of time later on. Before I ask if there's any questions remaining from previous days, I'd like to talk a little bit about as well the structure of section 4, which will be Friday. So this is mostly for the benefit of the people who are working asynchronously. But if I skip ahead here to section 4, which we'll be looking at on Friday, part of our work in section 4 will be creating a team. For those of us that are working synchronously, that will probably be our breakout rooms. Asynchronously, we're going to have to think a bit more about how to make these teams for the team parts of this. So as part of the work on Friday, we're going to be collecting together into teams. We're going to pick a repository for each team. So among the members of that team, one person should nominate their repository to be used on behalf of the group. Don't worry if it's a particularly good example or a particularly bad example. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. We'll then swap those repositories between the groups, and the group that receives your repository will go through it. They'll do a bit of investigation and they'll create some issues to propose some improvements that are made to your repository. Then with the rest of the time, you'll get your repository back and you'll work on it to make those improvements in a team. If you're working asynchronously, that's obviously going to be a bit more difficult. So what I would like to propose we do for those working asynchronously is, if you could please in the Slack channel just leave a message and say what time zone you're in, then look at the other messages that have been posted and try to build a group of people in a similar time zone to you. So if you have a group of you that have come to the workshop together, that's great, you can use that group. But we might need to join people who haven't met previously if you're working in similar time zones. And some of the instructors will check the Slack periodically to do a bit of matchmaking there if necessary. But that will be happening outside of the time when we're actually in this workshop. So we'll try and keep an eye on that, but I can't promise anything. I'll also make sure we add a message to Slack to say this as well. Once we've created our asynchronous teams, again, because it's going to be more difficult to swap repositories with each other, what I would propose is that you pick one of your repositories basically as soon as you can, as soon as you formed your team. So ideally that would be on Thursday, tomorrow, and leave a link to that repository in the Slack channel. Then one of the instructors will come and will take the role of the other team. So one of us will do a review of your repository and log a couple of issues. So that should be ready for you whenever you get to that part on Friday. So hopefully that should mean that those working asynchronously can get the same benefits of that group exercise. But obviously, if any of you encounter any difficulties, then please let us know and we will do our best to resolve them. Okay, that is what I wanted to say about section 4 on Friday. Rachel, you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering if it would be easier to coordinate the teams if we had like a shared Google Doc to sign up to.
That would make a lot of sense. Let's do that.
I'll make one.
Thank you.
Well, we have the document for questions for today. Do you want to use that one or do you want a separate one?
I think it might be easier for to have a separate
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. And so yes, the plan then, if you, once you've formed your teams, if you could please leave a note in the Google Doc that we will share a link to in Slack, and then we'll coordinate around that Google Doc. Section 3 today is quite a long one, so we will be running over into tomorrow as a catch-up. So don't worry if you haven't finished section 3 tomorrow, and don't worry if you haven't finished the previous days. Tomorrow, Thursday, will be a catch-up day where we don't add any new content, but we will make sure everyone has got to the same point ready to begin section 4 on Friday. We do have some optional extra content if people are ahead of schedule and don't have any catching up to do. We do have some other bits for you to do. So we'd like you please to join us again tomorrow, even if you do finish everything today. So before we head off to our breakout rooms, does anyone have any questions about any of that or about any of the content we've seen so far? Rose, yes.
Hi, I had a question just about the flow in test models. So I've never used that kind of testing before. And so like, I'm thinking, you know, in a program, I might have like functions at the beginning and then code that calls the function. So I'm not really sure like who's driving, like who's control, you know what I mean? I've never used the PyTest mark parameterized. So is that what is controlling the flow, or do you know what I mean?
Steve, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I can answer that. So when you say the flow, do you mean in terms of who's deciding what's going to be coded and what's going to be tested, or?
Well, or like, so like a function doesn't run unless you call it, right? So like what's doing the calling, I guess. Like to me, it looks like it's a declaring statement, you know, a PyTest mark parameterize. But maybe that's actually doing the calling.
Oh, I see what you mean. So yeah, so you by putting all the tests into the format that's expected by PyTest, what's happening is the PyTest program itself is looking and expecting to see various files in which contain the tests. So does that make sense?
Oh,
So,
I see. Right. Okay, so we're calling it from PyTest. Gotcha.
effectively, yeah, PyTest is just basically looking for all functions within the file that you've given it, and seeing which ones contain test underscore. If they start with test underscore, then it will run those functions as if they are tests.
And it knows whatever the parameters that you set right above it are the ones to use.
Yes. So it'll basically, because the function I think is we're declaring them at the moment. Yeah. So if you're declaring the parameterization of that test, then it will use those parameters when it calls the function in turn, if that makes sense. So yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And so if you left the same, well, let me see. And so if you don't have a parameterized statement in front of it, it doesn't call that test.
Well, it'll call the test, but the test won't be passed any parameters, and so it would be assumed, PyTest will assume that the parameters that you're going to make use of are effectively whatever you put in the function. So it'll just run the test as is, it won't pass it anything, and it will assume that everything it needs to run the test and assert the test is correct is within the function itself.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
The case where PyTest won't run your function is if it doesn't have test underscore in it. So you can use functions in your test code that PyTest won't recognize as a test if you want to break out some functionality.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions we have at the moment? Does anyone else have any questions?
There was one question that came up over the Slack channel during my daytime and therefore in the middle of the night for you, unfortunately. I think it was Vincent who was having trouble with PyCharm and getting the debugger to give any output. He was working under Windows, and I did have a quick chat with him and tried to troubleshoot, but I'm afraid I'm not so familiar with PyCharm, so it might be worth following up with him.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Oh, here you are.
Ah, in fact, he's online. Great. Hi.
I just wanted to say that the problem magically solved on its own. So the debugger tab was empty, but now it works. I don't know why.
Huh. Self-resolving bugs are the best kind.
Yeah.
We'll have a read through what you've written though and think about what the underlying cause might have been, but I'm glad to hear that it's resolved for now at least. Okay, if we have no more questions then, shall we open the breakout rooms and break up to go through today's content? I see they've just opened. Thank you very much. So if we could please all join the same breakout rooms we were in yesterday. I did notice one of the rooms was very big yesterday, so we might have to do a little bit of rebalancing, but one of the instructors will come round and ask you to rebalance if that's necessary. So we shall see you in the breakout rooms in a moment.